Hey, good afternoon, team, and welcome to BHN Dunedin Specials as we talk to some of the Dunedin mayoralty candidates, and a huge welcome to Carmen Houlahan. Hello and welcome, Carmen.
Kia ora, how are you?
Oh, kia ora. I'm doing very, very well. How about yourself?
Good, good. I feel a bit like I could become the guy off the BBC who was sitting there doing a live cross and his kids and his dog ran in. But anyway, we'll see how we go.
We'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. It'll be all good, however it happens. Yeah, no stresses from this end, at least. Now, I do a week nightly show called BHN, which is really focused on the big news conversations of the day, which goes nationwide. But we thought because local body elections are going on, and I'm in Dunedin, I'm based in the north, that we should look into some local body politics. We should make some content, have some conversations with, I guess, the people that would put their hands up to be our leaders, and then allow people of Dunedin to check out a bit of a slightly different take on conversations with candidates, because as people who do know our content, we're pretty laid back and relaxed, although that doesn't mean we just, talk about nothing. Still have interesting questions to ask and answer and that kind of thing. And now, speaking of that, if you are someone who would like to participate in this conversation, whether you're watching us on a Dunedin, in particular a Dunedin Facebook page, or on YouTube, you are more than okay for you to mention some a question or a comment in the comments. That comes up onto our feed. And to be honest with you, I imagine I've got a couple of pages of notes for all the candidates. A lot of the big issue type things will probably be looked at in those conversations. But if you've got an absolute particular question or a comment you want to make, you're welcome to put it into the comments. And if we get a chance to talk about it, we will. And if we get a chance to share it, we will. So yeah, this is one that we're branding BHN Dunedin. It's Dunedin, not Dunedin only. We're still going technically around the world right now through YouTube, but this is really Dunedin content for Dunedin people because local body elections is on the way.
So are you what my son would call a YouTuber?
Oh, I wouldn't use that. We just because one broadcasts onto YouTube, I don't know if that makes one a YouTuber per se. When I think of YouTubers, I think of, the Mr. Beasts of this world and people who are making,
that's my son's favorite. Yeah.
Making silly yet entertaining conversations.
Oh yes, I know all about him.
What we are, Carmen, is we're probably more a modern way of doing television, probably.
Yeah.
If people, YouTube at the moment is the biggest television network in New Zealand. It has been since about 2019. And I think number 2 is TVNZ, and I think number 3 is Netflix. So it's just a different way of doing it. And 20 years ago, this kind of conversation with these kinds of production values would have been on a major network because there wasn't this to do it in. Now there is, so we do it.
Yeah, I've started watching quite a few things on that you can put on your tablet. Like Stranger Things is the one I've been watching lately, but I did the box set of Game of Thrones a wee while ago, and so I agree.
Have you finished the whole Game of Thrones, whole thing done?
Oh yes, and I was eagerly waiting for the return on Monday, and we watched that. My husband's a fan as well, and we both watched it, and I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was great, I have to say, but it was good. Yeah.
Like most of the world, I watched all of the Game of Thrones when they came out, but like most of the world, were you pretty disappointed with the last season?
Oh, I thought the last season was gripping. Oh, the last episode, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't leave the screen, and I had to go somewhere. I was like, oh, it was so good. I loved it.
And did you know
full on? The fight was massive, but it was quite gripping.
Did you know about the Red Wedding before you watched it? Or were you one of those people that it took by shock?
Oh yeah, that was pretty gross, wasn't it? Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, this is what we do. We just have a chat about things in general, and I kind of want to apologize as well because I don't know what you've been doing today, Carmen, but I've already been out with the dog to the park. given her a wash down at Animates down there I think it's on Princess Street on the far side anyway. And and now I'm looking out the window to almost a cloudless sky, beautiful blue sky, lovely day, and we're sitting inside at 2:00 in the afternoon. So I apologize about being someone who's actually brought you in away from that beautiful weather today. But I guess if it had been terrible weather, it would have been the best decision we made today. But because it's lovely weather, I'm thinking, maybe we should do this in the evenings. But anyway,
good day for a walk. One of my favorite places is along Portsmouth Drive to go for a walk. But anyway, I could do that later.
Yeah, very good. Hey, so tell me about because you are a current councillor, so yes, you have a slightly different perspective from many when it comes into the mayoralty, I guess, conversation, because some aren't councillors and they're coming in saying we're the best for these reasons. You are a councillor. What was life for you, working career-wise, etc., before being a councillor?
Good question. So I've had a really varied career. So when I came out of school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I think my mother was like, get a job or else. She was going to go crazy. But I went and trained to be a beauty therapist, and I worked in Dunedin and Auckland. And in Auckland, I ended up getting a job for a French skincare company that I toured around other beauty therapists throughout New Zealand and trained them in the products and did things like that, but ended up taking beauty therapists and some of their clients to Europe. So we toured around France and visited some amazing places, and that was a great career. And then at the end of that time, I decided to retrain to be a journalist. And then as a journalist, I have had quite a varied time. I've worked for daily and weekly newspapers, and as a columnist and editor and newswire services, AAP and NZPA, and worked a bit with comms and PR as a publicist for the Christchurch Arts Festival and for the Dunedin Fringe. And so I really like art. So I've been a playwright. That wasn't a financially viable thing, but I had sellouts for when I was doing it. It was a sold out audience, so that was good. And it was an interesting story because I was telling the story about my great grandmother who died in the fires at Seacliff, which was a really sad part of our family history and something that nobody ever really talked about, because of the fact that it was in a mental asylum and the stigma with that. No one liked to speak about it. So that sort of brought out quite a few people came forward and approached me when that play came out and said, thank you for sharing those stories, because a lot of those women were never remembered because it was wartime and their death was just swept under the carpet. So that was actually a very rewarding thing to do, and I really enjoyed that. And I'm quite passionate about the arts because my BA's in theatre and I've got a master's in business entrepreneurship. But after journalism, so I moved to Wellington, where I ended up falling in love and meeting my husband, which was nice. And when I met him, he was in the press gallery working for the New Zealand Herald, and I was quite taken by that. I thought, anyone who's in the press gallery is good, I was like, this is great. And we got to go to my friend and I were delighted because we got to go to the press gallery party, which if anyone has done that, it's a really good party to go to. So that is
right. You are correct.
It is right. Yes. It's a really good party. And so that was very memorable. But when I was in Wellington, I worked for Booksellers New Zealand as the what used to be, quite a few people will remember it years ago, as the Montanas. And so I used to run the New Zealand Book Awards that were then, the sponsor was New Zealand Post Book Awards, and that was for adults and for children. So there's a whole lot of different aspects to that role. Part of it, the big part, was organising the awards that sort of took all year almost to organise them, because they're a big gala dinner, and as in the lead up to that, I had to have meetings with the judges. So we first of all picked the judges for each category, because we had a lot of different categories in the awards, and then I had to check the eligibility of all the books, and then I sat in on the judging meetings, and I got the great job of ringing publishers when their authors were chosen as finalists. And that was great because, of course, they were delighted to get my call. And I obviously told them, well, look, you've got a finalist and possibly a winner, but I couldn't tell them if they're winning or not. But it was all confidential. And so I'm used to dealing with confidential information. and and so I loved that. And then of course on the stage I presented awards to finalists and winners, which was great.
That sounds exciting. So that's quite a varied
favorite authors.
Yeah, quite a varied background and work experience. What led you
Yes.
from all of that work into going, hey, I want to be a part of, shaping Dunedin, like being a part, because you are in the council, as we've said for people who are just joining us, to decide you want to put your name forward to be one of the, I guess, leaders of the city?
Well, I grew up in Dunedin, and I've lived away for about 12 years, but most of my life I've spent in Dunedin, and I'm passionate about the city. I love it. And also as a journalist, anyone knows if they've been a daily journo, you get some days you come in and you have to cover a bit of everything. So I ended up covering, local government quite a few times, and I'm a bit of a nerd. My husband and I are probably the same, is that we both love politics. And so and I couldn't, because of there was reasons why I couldn't run earlier, but now an opportunity came and I thought, right, I really wanted to run for quite a while, and I put my name forward.
And you got there?
I got there.
And
it was when I ran the first time I didn't get on, but the second time I ran I got on. So yeah.
And is this your first term being in council?
First term, yes. So I spent 3 years in council.
Tell me about your experiences.
So my experience, how long we got? We've only got a short time. Thank you. My husband's very good. He's bringing me a coffee. Can I have a little
very good.
Thank you. I know, I'm very pleased. I'm very lucky. Oh, it's actually black. I need a bit of milk in that. So my experiences in council have been really varied. We've had an interesting 3 years. What I would say is that our council has been divided by a couple of issues, and those issues have been George Street mainly. It's been a very contentious issue, and it's come up a lot, and when it does, we've had some fiery debates, but we've also had some times where we've all come together, and we do tend to agree on more things than not, I think.
Oh yeah.
But I have loved being on council. I've really enjoyed working with a lot of the councillors, and I'm looking forward to working with them next term, hopefully, if I'm privileged enough to get the vote to return as either mayor or council.
So you're running for both?
Yes, I'm running for council and for mayor, and certainly the roles I've been given, so I don't know whether people realise, but the mayor chooses what portfolios you have and what boards you sit on. So I sit on the Toitu board, the DPAG board, which is the Dunedin Public Art Gallery, and I sit on the acquisitions committee at the Public Art Gallery as well, which I was quite excited about that, to see, sit in and see what they're looking at, new pieces of art and things. And I'm also the co-deputy chair of community and culture, and that's quite a large portfolio in that it covers a lot of different areas around our city. But so we sit in on all those meetings and we talk to the staff in those areas. But what you have to remember is that when you're on council, you're in a governance role. So we don't, a lot of things are obviously operational and done by staff. So we don't have a say in what they do day to day, but we can talk about anything we're concerned about. You can do that. But what I would say for probably new people coming in, and for members of the public, if they think, oh, this council's bloody useless, is that it takes quite a while for things to happen. So there's certain ways and processes in which I've found at times frustrating, but that, there is sort of a process to follow.
You brought up George Street being a position of, conflict within the council. Where do you stand on is it the pedestrianisation of George Street? Where are you personally on that?
So the pipes have to be replaced. There's no doubt about that, because they're old and they're breaking. So we've got to replace them. I'm concerned about the timing of that, because we've just had all the businesses have been, a lot of them limited in the trading or closed because of COVID. And I think now we've just come straight into doing the work. But I suppose you could argue, do you linger or just, go ahead and get it done as quickly as possible? I do feel that if we can get it done as quickly as possible, that's the best thing probably. But my objection to it, and the objection with a lot of other councillors that I've worked well with is the making it one way, and I don't think it makes sense for our city. I'd like to see it revamped, obviously have a makeover, but keep it two-way. And the option we had too that we could have that we had a chance to vote on, but it was voted down sadly, and we didn't win that vote, is that we could have had flexibility, and even the independent urban designer Cobus Mentz, who came and talked to us, he suggested this could be a good option as well. And I 100% agreed with what he said, is you could have like boulevards. So if you wanted to have an event, say a band playing or a market day or something like that in the middle of the street, and use that and have people come and mill around those areas, you put bollards up. So for, say, you could say on Saturday, we're going to have 3 hours where it'll be closed, and we're going to use, say, 2 blocks or 1 block, and the shops could be open and get the benefit of that as well. And you could do that. And it's also, it's not then just there all the time. It's something different, something exciting, and people would come in for that. But they didn't want that. So the majority of councillors voted for another option, which is one way. Now, George Street, if you've lived here and grown up here, which sounds like you have, you'll know it's often used as a thoroughfare. It has been for years for people to get to one end of town to the other. What it means, now it's one way, is that it's a people-friendly street. People take prominence on that area along that street. And so the speed limit for cars is 10 kilometres. Now, anyone who drives the car knows, and I've heard some people say, I can't even start the engine at 10K. And I mean, it is, it's absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. I just think it's just, I don't know what you call it, but it's pedestrianisation gone mad, in my opinion.
So you'd be for prettying up the space, making it look better, but leaving it two ways. Because there's also, I mean, like it's an interesting perspective about what to do. I mean, I've been to places all over everywhere where pedestrianised zones are amazing, and they're amazing to have. But I also, as someone who wants to go to, I don't know, let's say the mall or 2 degrees, the extra hassle of needing to find that park, then it's like what weighs up and which is better. And I can see there's obviously benefits from both aspects of it. It's just interesting to know. For me, a lot of the time, it's like why is it someone's for or against it? And it sounds like what you're saying. So it sounds like what you're saying is it's about the traffic flow is more important to not cause a bottleneck as opposed to giving the pedestrians more space.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I think personally is that pedestrianisation doesn't always make a huge difference or a vibrancy to an area. It's only certain areas that it works for. I mean, you look around, there's a lot of cities around the world and in New Zealand that have pedestrianised their streets, and they've actually reverted back and said it didn't work.
Where has that happened? Where has it happened in New Zealand?
Lots of different places. Like, for example, I think that happened in Hawke's Bay, but there's places in America, I know people have given examples, heaps of examples about that. And there's a lot, all you need to do is Google around the world. There's heaps of places overseas or even some in New Zealand where they've had pedestrianisation and it wasn't, the place was dead and people weren't coming. Because what happens is traffic doesn't come through. The businesses start, don't get, I know it's perhaps some people will say, oh, that's too lazy. People need to get out of their car. And yes, there is a degree of that. But right now, a lot of us lead really busy lives. We just want to get to one point or another. And you use your car and you go, and I know we need to have some change of, the way we think with that. I agree. Absolutely. However, businesses are affected, and the urban designer said that as well, when you can't get easy access to shops. And shops know it. Shops notice it. The minute the cars are blocked off, their income goes down. You can ask them. The retailers have noticed it.
You say there has to be some kind of change in the way we do things with cars.
Yep.
So I'd be interested to hear from you as to what you think about that and how that change should be. And it's a little bit like you're talking about the pipes. And I hear what you're saying about it would be good not to interrupt business at the moment, but at some stage it has to happen. And I think we'd always find a point where we go, not now. Let's put it off, not now, because not now is the wrong time. Let's put it off. And then at that time we'd go, not now, let's put it off. So I think we can always find a reason not to do things. So if you acknowledge that we have to change our attitudes or our practices around cars and how we're using them, But we're also saying, but not for George Street. What do you think we should do? What do you think we should try and implement for the city to help us have less of an impact from cars? Because you've already said we are going that way and we need to.
Yeah, good question. I actually think we've done a lot of talk in council about climate change, but I don't think we've had a lot of action actually, and I'd like to see more. And part of that, for example, if we pedestrianise off a whole lot of streets in our city, what we're going to have, and we've seen reports on it, saying that cars will be jammed, traffic will be congested, and what will happen when they're sitting there idling, their emissions, they're giving out all their carbon monoxide into the air, it's creating more emissions, so it's making our problem worse. I think we've got to really think through what we're doing and do it sensibly. And what I've been saying, and other councillors are as well, is that we want to see a better and more viable and user-friendly public transport system. Okay. Now, one of the things we've advocated for is a loop bus. Now, we started talking about that over a year ago, maybe even 18 months ago, and we all agreed, well, a lot of us anyway, agreed that a loop bus would be great. But the minute you make it one way, it's actually difficult for that loop bus to get around. But what I'd love to see is from probably around the exchange area, a loop bus that's free, like the Melbourne trams, you know, that you can jump on, jump off, and it just goes up and down all day around the city, but has to go, in my opinion, to the university as well. Because what a lot of students have said to me is that, you know, when they've got a gap in between lectures, they haven't got a lot of time to head into town. But it would be great if there was really easy transport to get them into town. They would go and they would use a lot of those, go to a lot of the cafes, go to a lot of the shops in town. So if we had a loop bus that went round, picked up people on and off, that would work really well. But it doesn't work that well when you're only one way. So that's another reason why it would be good. I would also love to see that connect up with a park and ride, or what I'd call a transport hub in St Andrew Street. And we have talked about that off and on. But, you know, ideally, in an ideal world, we need to look at funding for some of these things, because obviously they do cost money. But we've had a council that's talked about a $20 million footbridge. It might take a bike and a person walking from Queen's Gardens over to the area on the harbour, you know, how do I explain, Steamer Wharf, so around there.
Yeah.
So they're prepared to spend 20 million on that. And or we've probably got 20, well, there's certainly millions being spent on different transport, safer transport areas around the city. Like, for example, they're going to change the bus lane. They're going to try and make taking away all the car parking along Princess Street and change that, and then make it so that we could have more traffic going along there, but have a bus lane, and which a bus lane is good, but all those parks will go along there, and it's going to create an interesting dynamic with our traffic. But a lot of different things they're looking at doing are not necessarily, I think we could use the money in a better way sometimes. So there's ideas that, all I'm saying is there is budgets we could perhaps take from. That's the point I'm trying to get at.
And your suggestion for the your solution for the moving away from cars is better public transport, like the loop. What about between Dunedin and Mosgiel?
I would love to see a daily rail service from Mosgiel to Dunedin. Now that might sound extreme to some, but they used to have it. And I'd love to see us rekindle that, you know, have it. There's a lot, we've got a beautiful railway station, and we've got a lot of people that might drive. The people I think we need to target is someone who comes in from Mosgiel, and it's one person in their car, and they're driving in and they park and they're there all day, they work in town. So that'd be a great, you know, person to target, to get a train in from Mosgiel into Dunedin, get out at the railway station, walk into your office, and then go back.
Or
so
use the
things
loop.
like that, I think, and you know that. But the thing is, some people still have to use a car. There are, you know, I realise traffic and cars do make emissions, but there's certainly I don't think to solve our climate change problems that we have to pedestrianise the whole city.
Well, no, I mean, I know you're kind of maybe exaggerating for effect, but no one's suggesting pedestrianising the whole city, are we? There's a section on George Street, just to
no,
make it
but
clear.
there is new legislation that's coming in that would give that possibility if we had a mayor and who was wanting to do that, and our current mayor is quite keen on that.
Do you have any costings for any of this, especially for the train to Mosgiel? Because obviously, as a ratepayer, with these big ideas and big promises, we also want to know, bottom lines as well. Do you have any ideas around that costings, especially for the train?
What I will say about the train is that we've been talking about this. I talked about it last election, and I've talked about it regularly this term while we've been in. We've been looking at it. We've talked to people at the at Dunedin Rail. We've talked to people and the issue at the moment is that line is quite full with freight. So it's an issue with actually getting space to have a daily rail service. So at the moment, there's an issue with it because we've got carriages. Some of those carriages are a bit old, but we do have carriages. We could do it if we can find space, around the freight issues. It's not going to be a huge cost, but if we can't get over that barrier, which at the moment it seems to be a barrier that's hard to pass, is that we would need to build, a new track, and that cost could be massive. Some of these things, Patrick, won't be solved with local government money. We're going to need government support, and something that another councillor, Jim O'Malley, has talked about as well, because I fully support his advocate. He's advocated for rail as well, and I fully support that. And he's talked about how, because he sits on the transport committee, is that we often miss out on a lot of the funding that places that Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch get because we're not seen as a larger metro. We need to be recognised by government as a larger city that can, and we are a growing city, but we're missing out on opportunities for funding. And we need to be seen through the government's eyes as an area that can get more funding. Because, Wellington, I think, got huge amounts of money for their rail service, and we should, it ticks every box for sustainability, but we should qualify for some of that funding. So that's what I don't think it's fair to put the burden on ratepayers for this, but that's why I'm certainly, we're working on the minister, and we've been working on lots of different avenues to think creatively outside the square. And, where there's a problem, there's an opportunity, in my opinion.
So you're suggesting central government should pay for the whatever the upgrades are needed, or the logistics are needed for the rail service between Mosgiel and Dunedin?
Yes, I think what I'd like to see is the government give us funding for a public transport system. They've already said they might look at funding, subsidising costs for buses. And I think that the government needs to step up if they want, sustainable, good public transport that helps solve some of the problems to lower our emissions. We need money for that, because to fight climate change is expensive. So we need to do it. We need a really good public transport system. So we need financial help with that.
All right, let's because we're talking about transport, let's stay there for a second and let's talk about this. It feels to me like it's a bit of a new idea. I don't know, maybe I've missed it in the council. No, I'm looking at the screen right now, and the screen has a picture on it of turning the current one-way system back into a two-way system.
Oh, yes.
And that feels like a new, maybe I've missed it. Maybe this has been talked about publicly for 6 months, but it feels like it's something that's popped up more recently. Maybe it's because of the mayoralty coming up and candidates are talking about it. And if we're talking about transport now and public transport, where do you sit on converting the one ways? And I'm going to say back to two ways, because this area used to be two way and then it became one way again. Where are you on that?
Well, this has been talked about for quite a while.
Okay.
And it's been, once again, another controversial issue, is because, and to the point that even Grey Power, Joe Miller, the president of Grey Power, started a petition on it a while ago saying how she was so concerned about it. I have major concerns about it. And the reason is that if you go through the day at any time, but obviously mainly peak times, along that one way, there's so much traffic that goes along there. If you made that two way, it's going to cause, once again, a major traffic jam and congestion in our city. I don't see any benefits in it at
Well,
all,
let
personally.
me ask you this. And look, to be honest with you, I don't understand why we'd need to do this. But if there's currently 2 lanes on most of that section going each way, why would it cause more congestion if now there was 2 lanes going each way but on different streets? So in other words, there's 2 lanes going north at the moment, 2 lanes going south. If on those 2 areas there was 1 lane north and 1 lane south, and then on the other one there was 1 north and 1 south, it doesn't seem to be any less availability for cars. Why would that create a whole bunch of congestion versus what there is now?
Well, what I can tell you is the images we've seen
Yep.
show trees, a barrier in the middle, and plants, trees being planted, which I like trees, but I don't like trees in the middle of a state highway. People walking over them. The idea that we've seen is that they lower the speed on that area. Now, when people get on that state highway, it's a one-way and it's a thoroughfare. People want to just get in their car and go home. They don't want to stop because people are walking all over the street or because there's trees being planted in the middle. But also, if you've combined that, we haven't seen the modelling for it. We've asked for traffic modelling, but is that if you have George Street made one way and this then made two-way, we're going to see a huge bottleneck, and that has an effect on how you can get around the city. And that's my concern, and particularly with this area around access to the new hospital.
Is that one of the reasons they'd rather have it 2 ways, because of the access to the new hospital, which means no matter which way you could come, you'll be able to get to the main entrance? Like let me tell you where I am on this, right? I see this as, I don't understand why they do this, because like I said, if there's currently 2 lanes going north and 2 lanes going south in both places, if they just make one of those lanes in each of the roads, there's still 2 lanes going north and 2 lanes going south. So I don't see the reason to do it, the rationale to necessarily do it, which is why I guess I'm asking what the rationale is. Equally, I don't see the rationale that it wouldn't work, but then I go, if it's going to be the same, which is where I'm kind of thinking, why would we spend a shit ton of money to make it the same when it comes to traffic congestion? But I did wonder then, as you just said, that maybe with the new hospital, it would be sensible to have a lane in each direction, which means no matter where you come from during an emergency, you can get to the hospital. You don't have to go around, the back and find the one way in. First time I've thought about that, but it's a thought, isn't it?
Well, we do have 2 one-ways, one going the other way as well. Our city is set up so that it flows either way.
Yeah.
And the minute you start to do that, it creates traffic, what I'd say probably traffic confusion and congestion, because if you're halving or changing what our understanding of this for what we saw is that it's going to, the whole purpose of it is that they're trying to cut down the number of cars using it and the traffic flow. They want to slow it down, and they want to make the state highway more people friendly, because they're worried about large, I could be wrong, I'm not a traffic expert, but my understanding is some of the concerns are large numbers of traffic going past the hospital build,
Right.
and while it's happening, there could be things on the road. So there's going to be a bit of disruption during the building process, there's no doubt about that. But if we have George Street one way and this 2-way, that affects the flow of the traffic in our city.
Look,
and
as
not
you say,
in a positive way.
I think it's stupid. This is my personal opinion now. I think it's stupid to turn them into a 2-way thing whilst there's construction going on, because whilst there's construction to the hospital is going on, if there's 2 lanes going in one direction, you can actually block off one of those lanes and you've still got one going in that direction. Whereas if it was one in each direction and you blocked off one of those lanes, and you've actually blocked access to one path. Like I said, I don't see why this is the case. I think about coming down off State Highway 1, coming south, going straight onto the one-ways, getting onto the motorway going south and keeping on going. That feels like better flow to me. And if the rationale is actually we want to make these main highways more pedestrian friendly, I would say that seems a bit contrarian to what we have main highways for. Main highways are for cars, pedestrian zones are for pedestrians. I don't know why we'd try and make what is basically State Highway 1 more pedestrian friendly, unless they're talking about like outside the university. For people who don't know, although this conversation is not for people outside of Dunedin, I guess there is a question to be said about that main state highway coming down in 2 or 3 lanes past the university. Is that what they're talking about with the pedestrian zones, making those areas? Because I think about going past the railway station and those kinds of places. That's commercial area that doesn't need to be more pedestrian friendly necessarily.
Well, I think the concern is and why this is being put forward is because of the hospital build. So that's the reason why this has happened. So, well, why they're proposing this. So at the moment, the Transport Minister is considering it and will make a decision on it. He's been down and looked at it, and so we're waiting to hear what will happen there. But certainly I know our Mayor has spoken to him, and certainly the indication from our current Mayor and the councillors that support this situation, they are in favour of it. I'm not, and I know there's some other councillors that are.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about that. You were a part of a letter to Waka Kotahi that Mayor Aaron Hawkins described as a clear abuse of power. What is your a clear abuse of process? Mm-hmm. What is your response to the Mayor talking about your guys' letter as a clear abuse of process?
Well, what I'd say about that is who is being abused here? Because quite frankly, the last
he said it's an
abuse
of process. He's talking about the process being abused, not a person.
Yeah, well, what I would say is that there's been sitting listening to some of the decisions that have been made in the last 3 years is like an abuse, quite frankly. And so to hear that was quite amusing. But yeah, I'm just, words fail me, quite frankly.
You had Councillor Lord, though, who actually agreed in general with your perspective, right? He was on the similar sort of side, but he didn't sign the letter saying that it was undermining the council decision and that was wrong. How do you respond to what Councillor Lord had to say?
What I would say about that letter was that another councillor sent it. I didn't send it.
But you signed on to it.
Well, I voted the way I did. So that's what I'll say on that.
Well, hang on. Did you? No. I want clarity. Are you saying you didn't give permission for your name to be attached to the letter that was sent on?
What I would say is I can't remember us doing it, and the other councillors I've talked to can't either. But it doesn't mean that we didn't do that. We may have. We just don't recall at the time when that was done. But we certainly made the vote, and we all agree with the stance of what's stated.
So I'd be interested. Yeah, let's say you're mayor, you win and you're mayor, and a bill gets passed, and then you had councillors publicly dissent that bill to an official group, right? Like this letter went to an official group. How would you respond to that as mayor, to have a group of councillors within your team, however you guys refer to each other, to then sort of publicly respond to that? And the reason I ask that is kind of based on what Councillor Lord said. And the way I think about what he says, it kind of makes the council look like a dysfunctional group. And I need you guys to, I'm a ratepayer, right? So I want you guys to be functional, not dysfunctional, but it comes across like there's a group of people who now have a decision, gets made, democratically passed, whatever that means in this day and age. And then a group of people try and somewhat undermine it by going to the place that the vote is going to. So if you were the mayor, and let's forget about this issue, but it was another issue that you were in support of and it all passed, how would you respond to those councillors? How would you react to that?
Look, I'm a member of the Institute of Directors, and I know rules around good governance, and obviously around a board, if a majority decision is made, that's it. You stick with the majority decision, you leave it at that. I realise that. So however, local government is different. We are voted in by the public, and the majority of people that we have talked to, many of us are saying they don't want the one-way change to a two-way. Yep. So when we hear that there's, for example, as I mentioned before, someone like Jo Miller, the president of Grey Power, putting out a petition because she's so upset about it, and, things like that, it makes you think, okay, what is happening here? We need what people don't always realise is that you don't often hear the full story. It's quite hard to get a lot of transparency in local government as well, for people to know what's actually going on, and for people to hear, look, this behind the scenes, this is what happened. We just want people to know that we are not happy with it. A vote has been done, but we did not agree with it, clearly, because we voted against it. But a decision, it's the other thing to think of with this, it's not a decision that we're going to be able to make anyway. It's going to be made by the Minister of Transport. So what that email was doing was alerting the Minister of Transport to the fact that we're not happy about it. So be aware that it's not a majority, it's not a, unanimous decision by this council, and there are people who've got concerns. So
But
it was just highlighting that there are people who are really concerned about it. And I
it's
actually think that's a good thing.
well, it seems to me that the justification, I wrote it down as you were saying it, you wanted people to know, and you wanted people to know you voted against it. That to me sounds like an interview with the ODT, not necessarily a letter to Waka Kotahi to undermine the whole overall process. I mean, looking at the voting record, as you say, we know you voted against it. We know that you weren't in favour of it. So we know that. It seems that it just feels like it's on a bit of a different level to then go to the organisation and say, hey, by the way, some of us aren't that happy about this. I don't know. It's got a, like, let me ask you this. Councillor Radich, who I think was the person who sent the letter on, he said the decision to move to a two-way system was, and this is a quote, against the will of the people. Do you think that's an important note to make, that it's against the will of the people?
Well, there's certainly what I would say, there's a lot of people who aren't keen on it. But what I would say, if you've got questions around the email that went to Waka Kotahi, you need to talk to Councillor Radich.
Luckily, we will be. Well, let me ask you this question. Do you think the council should always operate within the will of the people?
Oh, I think we're there to represent the people as best we can and to advocate for issues. But all of us are voted on and we'll have certain, things come up, issues arise that certain groups perhaps in our city might say, look, we're really upset about this. We need support. Like, for example, at the moment, we've got our band sector in our community saying, look, we're not happy with this, we're not happy with that. There's a whole lot of things they're not happy about, and they've got good reason for concern for some of those things. Now, so some of us will advocate for them. Not all councillors will. Some people will advocate for the businesses because they'll say, well, we're not happy about this or that, So there's always going to be different sectors that have concerns, and some of us will advocate for them and some of us won't. But that's what it's like in a democracy and in an area where you've got different diverse voices. And that's what we've got. We don't always agree, and we're never going to. And
of course,
if I was privileged enough to be mayor, what you have to understand, and this is, I think it's a really important point actually, is that right now we're in campaign mode, but the minute campaigning is over, we all get around there and we need to work together for the city. And we do need to advocate for people and talk, but someone said to me the other day when I was talking about issues, and I thought, God, you knocked the nail on the head there with that comment, because he said to me, it sounds to me like you haven't sat down with these people and had a meal. And I know that sounds a silly thing to say, but Councillor Elder and I have been saying since the beginning of this term, let's sit down and let's just get together and chat about issues and get to know each other a bit better, because anybody who's been a manager knows that if you've got a good working relationship with people, you can work through problems a lot easier and work out issues. That hasn't happened, and I think it's a real shame, and we could have been working a lot better as a team, in my opinion.
Well, I'm going to get onto some conversations about the cohesive nature of the council itself, as in you guys, the councillors and the mayor at some stage. But I just want to come back to this point because not that you have to answer it, but what I wanted to know was, is it important for a council to actually listen to the will of the people? Because, and I agree, it's not your email and it's Councillor Radich who said this, but I guess what I'm saying is, if there's going to be a defense of we shouldn't do this because it's against the will of the people, what else can we put in that box that's against the will of the people that the council would therefore push through? Like, for example, if you ask the will of the people what their rates are going to be next year and then follow that, I'm sure they will be a lot less than what the council is going to be charging them. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, where the will of the people, because if we're not going to follow the will of the people with other things, then this is not a defense for the one ways either. You can't have it both ways. Not you personally, but one can't have it both ways, if you know what I mean.
So what is the question?
So what do you think about following along to the will of the people when making policy and rules and laws from the council?
Well, it's a good point. And something that many of us have been a bit annoyed about is that a couple of people organised a petition around George Street. If you talk about the will of the people, they have more than 6,500 signatures saying that they wanted George Street to remain two-way. That was if you watch the video of that meeting, I was embarrassed. It was awful. They were shut down and shut off and pretty much dismissed. It was quite rude, in my opinion. So when you say listen to the will of the people, I think that is something.
Well, no, let's not get caught up in individual kind of situations, because it sounds like what you're saying now is they should have been listened to the will of the people.
Yes, they should have.
So are you saying, what are you saying in general, as mayor? I guess what I'm asking you is, are you going to make policy based on the will of the people or not? Because I don't think you can have it both ways. Because as I said, if we were following the will of the people as to what the rates were going to be next year, I'm sure it would be a lot less. I don't think you can pull out, not you personally, Carmen, but I don't think one can pull out, this is the will of the people, so we should do it in this instance, and then ignore the will of the people in another instance that you don't want to listen to them. Not you personally again, but let's say the mayor's position. So I'm looking for clarity from you, if we're going to use the will of the people as the yardstick for how we should legislate or not. Where would you sit on that as the mayor?
Well, at the end of the day, we sit around, everybody has a vote. And if the people that the public have voted in get a majority for a vote, then it passes. Then that is has to be the.
But that's what happened. But that's what happened with the two ways, and you didn't.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what is happening is that there has been concern voiced about the vote, because many people feel that the majority of people don't want the one-way made two-way. Anyone who's lived here for most of their life looks at that and goes, this is ridiculous. What are they doing to our city? So,
yeah, okay.
Look,
well, let's move.
So
let's move on from that. Well, let's move on from this topic, but I'm a bit confused, because I hear you saying should follow the will of the people for George Street, but then again, when a government vote, or a local body votes, when the council votes, that is the will of the people, but then in this instance, the council voted and you didn't go with it, and you made a very public, well, you're saying speak to Radich about that, I'll do that, but a very public statement about how that wasn't okay. So I'm getting mixed messages, which is fine. You don't have to clarify exactly, but I'm getting mixed messages about, because what I want to know is, as the mayor, what am I going to expect of you as a ratepayer and a resident in Dunedin? And I'm getting mixed messages about this.
I mean, if the majority of people want something, then that's, that is, we do have to listen to the people. And I think it's a very good point you've raised around the will of the people, because what I feel hasn't happened that well is that by law, just to explain what happens, a lot of people might not understand this. Sure. Councils have to consult by law. And what consulting means is that the council would go out and say, this is what we plan to do. And then people can say, okay, that's good or not. But what I think we should be doing, in my opinion, is engage. And engaging means you say to people, what do you want? There's a huge difference between saying, we've already decided this is what's happening. Here we go. We'll go out and consult and tell you that this is what we're doing. Okay,
so that brings me back to my question, though. So if you're presented a petition by 10,000 Dunedinites that show the will of the people is to drop rates by 40%, what are you going to do?
Well, if people are screaming, saying, look, rates, well, okay, to give you an example, I've voted against rate increases, if that's the example you want to give. I mean, I think our rate increases are unsustainable. And if I'm mayor, I'm going to look at ways for us to try and reduce those costs. And I'd like to see it set at a rate set at 5%, and that we aim to keep it that way for as long as possible. I mean, I just think it's unsustainable to keep increasing the rates. And when I look at my bill and other people, when I go around and see them, that's the one, one of the biggest things they complain about. I know a family member who's got, for one home, their rates are over $5,000 a year. I mean, that sort of cost is over $100 a week. That's unsustainable for many people. I've heard, once again, actually, Joe Miller from Grey Power saying that there's some pensioners who are worried they're going to lose their house because they can't afford the rates. We can't have that. That's unsustainable. But obviously, we have to have a working budget to run our city. So we do have to charge some rates. But all I'm saying is, since you used the example of rates, I think it's, they're too high.
Well, look, the conversation is actually not about the rates. It's about, as we said, following the will of the people. And all I'm saying is, I mean, you've said keep rates increases at 5%, and we're going to move on now because I think we've done this part of the conversation. But if the will of the people was actually a rates reduction by 5%, I don't think the council would follow that. So all I'm saying is, what I like to see in my public figures and my politicians is consistency. If we're going to follow the will of the people and say it's really important to do it in area A, which let's say is the one ways, let's say the George Street pedestrianisation, then you kind of have to follow the will of the people in other areas, or it's hypocritical. Not saying that of you, Carmen, not saying that of anyone in particular, but I'm saying consistency is important in public office, because what's important to me is I can learn about you now and I can learn about what you're going to do. But if the most important thing for me is to understand how you think and operate, because there's going to be things happening in 2 years from now that we haven't talked about, that I don't know about, that I don't know because it's a policy or it's an issue that's popped up. And I kind of want to get a vibe for how my elected official is going to act in that situation that I can't talk about or question about now because we don't know it's coming. You know what I mean?
I actually think there's some, and I like what you've raised about the will of the people, because I think there are quite a few things in this term that have been raised that the majority of people, from what I'm hearing and what other councillors are hearing, do seem to want. Like, for example, a good example of that is parking. People go ballistic about the lack of parking, and the satisfaction with council is really low. And when you look through our, we have I think it's called the ROS survey, Residents' Opinion Survey. The thing that we get hit on every single time is parking. Now, if you want to talk about the will of the people are talking and they're saying, give us better parking. We want to be able to get around the city easier. This council has not listened to that. It's ignored it, and it's actually taken, in some situations, taken car parks away and made it more difficult for people to get around the city. So
well, I hope that if and when you're mayor, was that if and when you're mayor, we'll put it that way, if a policy comes over your desk, that is the will of the people. I just hope, therefore, you don't vote it down, because that would be consistency.
Well, what I would say is, if there's a majority vote, then that motion will pass. I mean, that's governance. So how we vote, we knew that. And what's happened here is that there was a vote. We lost that vote on the one way. So then a councillor chose to email the minister and just highlighting the fact that not all councillors agreed with this. I certainly don't agree with
that. But don't you think, look, I don't, look, I mean, this is not about you, this is about him, though. Don't you think that's just petulant and bratish? Oh, I lost. I need to tell the big boys that I lost. It's like, of course, we know that it's not 100%. He would have known it's not 100%. They could have seen the voting right. I mean, don't answer for him. It's none of your business. But your name was signed to it. So I guess it's at least fair to clarify where you were on that. And what I hear you saying is that you didn't necessarily give permission for your name to be used on that, even if you voted against it. That's what I hear you saying. Correct me if I'm wrong.
What I will say is that I 100% agree with the fact that with voicing concerns about the issue, because I voted against it. That's what I will say.
Okay, cool. Hey, listen, talking about this money and funding and will of the people, we're moving on from that, but we talked about money and funding. So question is, in Dunedin, can you identify anything that's significantly underfunded that needs more funding? And equally, can you identify anything that's overfunded that you think maybe is a bit of a waste of ratepayers' money being spent in Dunedin at the moment?
Boy, I thought this was a casual chat. Okay, right. Let me think on this one. Blimey. Okay.
So what I'm asking is where is
up and say they're underfunded?
What I'm asking from you, I mean, again, remember, this is you as the mayor wearing the chains, looking out there and identifying where is the waste and where is more need for investment. That's basically what I'm asking.
Oh, look, there's no doubt about it. We could do with more investment, and we are putting a lot of investment into our infrastructure, but certainly for Mosgiel, we could do with more investment into infrastructure there, because we have quite a desperate need for more housing in our city. And so that's one of the areas that is happening, though. It is starting to happen. And the other area, and I do think, because I served as a councillor on the Mosgiel Community Board, I think the people in Mosgiel do have a case of saying a little bit that they're the poor cousins. They have a lot of rate being paid from that area, and they perhaps, don't necessarily benefit as well as people in the city, and I think more funds could be allocated to Mosgiel. For example, I think their main street could be made more vibrant, and that doesn't mean pedestrian. I'm not suggesting pedestrianising their street, but they also but also, they could do with some support to help the business owners work together, things like that, getting them perhaps some more marketing in the area to promote more people to come out there and shop. I think someone complained the other year that they didn't have a Christmas tree up, but there's a lot of things perhaps they could do with a bit more TLC. I think it's fair to say.
Is a part of that because what I'm hearing you saying is that the amount of rates they pay, let's say per capita, is overrepresented for the resources they're getting back from it. So they're putting more proportionally into the rates coffers than perhaps what they're getting back, and that's being used in other areas on a per capita basis. Is that kind of part of what you're saying?
A little bit. I mean, what they certainly feel that, and I think to a degree there's a little bit of truth to that.
Okay.
I just think they certainly have there's a lot of great facilities out in Mosgiel, but I think, for example, I just think there could be more funds perhaps allocated to that area. And I think certainly a lot of the people have called for the trucks to be off the main street. And I think we need to look at some action on doing that, because a lot of the business owners are sick of the trucks going up and down Gordon Road. We need to look at a way to safely divert those from that main street, because there's a safety issue as well. And there's quite a few things in Mosgiel that I think people are saying we'd like to see. I think they just need a bit, they want to know that council is listening, it's been heard, and they've had more engagement. And I think we could do a bit more of that. That's my feeling on that. The other area is South Dunedin has major issues coming up around obviously climate change mitigation and the sea level. We're working with ORC on that, so there is regular work, but certainly funding will be needed for that long term. But we're hoping, I hope that a lot of that funding will come from the government. That's something that hasn't, certainly the current leadership now hasn't taken up the offer that I know of, or didn't seem that keen. So I'll let him speak for himself, but on taking funding or having the government step in. And I think for something so big, we need to look at government support. Every time there's a large, there's a large rainfall, or there's a risk of flooding, we need to make sure that infrastructure in South Dunedin is really good, and there's areas there that need to be fixed. And obviously the high water table, it is an issue for future generations living in those areas. And not just South Dunedin, every coastal area in our city is going to be issues. So when you talk about what's underfunded, I mean, look, if we had a magic wand,
sure.
Because there's huge costs with all of that. But we also have, I think like any city at the moment, we have a lot of people who are very vulnerable. They might not have jobs. Some people struggle to get food each day. The food banks are swamped, and our social services are finding it hard to get housing for many people. I think social housing is needed. So there's a huge, need in our city for that. Now, most vulnerable need to be taken care of. They're part of our society, and it's a benefit to all of us if people are, their well-being is looked after and they're doing better. So those are issues that I think we should be judged on as a city, as how are our most vulnerable being treated. And that's something that I'm concerned about. There's never going to be enough money to support everyone, but I think we need to consider it. We've got to have it as a priority to look after the most vulnerable.
Okay.
But
sorry, you can finish. Sorry, because there's a new question. Cool. Where are you on Three Waters?
I don't right now. The way it is, I don't agree with it. And there's many reasons for that.
Like
My
what?
main reason is that I was so annoyed because I sat in a meeting and I looked straight at the minister, and the minister got asked, "Will you mandate this?" And she looked straight at us and said, "No, I'm never going to make it compulsory." And then about a week or so later, she did. That to me just showed really poor, didn't show any integrity. It wasn't honest, and that just didn't sit well with me. We're now
What about
being pushed.
what about the actual? What about? I mean, like, if what you're saying is you're going to vote against it because of Nanaima Huta's integrity, I'd rather, as a ratepayer, know what's best for the city and our resources and our infrastructure, rather than whether she's a nice person or not. What are some of the other
Nothing to
things
do
why you're
with
not?
whether she's a nice person or
Well,
not. That was only
I
one of the
paraphrased.
reasons. I've got
Yeah, I paraphrased.
10 different
Yeah, tell
reasons
us.
why, but I was about to say them when you came in. So I'll just say one of them is a lack of local voice and local knowledge. And then the Three Waters entity bill that's just gone through now has a couple of clauses in it that I find really alarming. One is that government can revoke council decisions if it thinks that they are in any way detrimental to Three Waters. So it's democratically elected members can make a vote on something in our area around Three Waters, and if the government doesn't agree with it, it can revoke it. That's against democracy. I do not agree with it. The other thing is that they can take our staff from Three Waters and second them to the new entity, which is happening throughout the country, and it's putting pressure on all councils who, because there's a shortage of really experienced good staff in those areas, is that we don't have an ability to get those that replace those staff
Can I
if
just
they're taken by the government.
Can I ask about that point? So you've got lots of points, and just so I don't get lost at the end. But if they were to take it, like if Three Waters was to happen, it was going to become centralized, and you're saying they'd take staff currently responsible for that infrastructure. Doesn't that mean the Dunedin Council wouldn't need them anymore because it would be handed by the central government? So wouldn't it make sense for the staff that have the experience locally in Dunedin to go to the centralized group?
What I'm meaning is, in the process, like say we've got a year or so until it happens, or we don't know the exact time frames even, because there's so many questions that we haven't got answers to. In that period, we've still got to operate and run our infrastructure services.
Right.
And that's what's happening at the moment. So I understand the rationale on why they want those staff.
So you're saying in the interim, before there was a centralized, there was a
Yes.
centralized group, and after the decision was made, you'd lose staff and there wouldn't be representation of staff,
For,
whether that was 6 months or 12 months
process,
or 18 months or whatever it was.
Yes, up to 12 to 18 months, whatever. We've got a period where we could have our staff, all be seconded to the new entity, and we haven't got staff available when we've got to function normally and do all those services. So that's put pressure on every council throughout the country. 67 councils throughout New Zealand, about 60 of them voiced concerns about Three Waters. There's a reason why many of them have voiced concerns. We're an entity D that has 22 councils in it. That's what we've been told we have to be in, which is the whole of the South Island. Now, on the governance structure that we've been told at the moment, there'll be 12 positions on that board. We'll get 6 for all the 22 councils. Mana Whenua will have 6 positions as well, and that will make up the 12. Now, because there's only going to be 6 positions, it's very possible that out of those 6, Dunedin won't even get a seat. So that means we don't get a voice at the table. We can't guarantee that. And the chance out of 22, we don't, it's a gamble really, isn't it? We don't know. So what we have put forward is that if we have to go into this, we want an Otago Southland model.
Yeah, I read that.
We're already working together with, other councils anyway, and it makes sense for us. We feel we'd have a better voice, a stronger voice on local, and the knowledge that we have on the local issues. If there's an emergency, we're right here. We can act immediately. We're not instructed by someone in Christchurch or Nelson. We know our city. We know what we're doing. So I think anywhere we can make it more localized is better, in my opinion.
So it's not, just to try and paraphrase back to make sure I'm clear. If it was, it's currently they're saying 4 entities. If it was more like 8 entities, like let's say Oamaru South, Oamaru North could be, so that means that the Otago South, and you'd be more open to it, more okay with it if it was still some kind of collective, but a smaller, more localized collective. It's obviously not local because Invercargill is not Dunedin and neither is Queenstown, but it will be more localized than the current model, which is basically all of the South Island bar the Nelson Marlborough region. Is that basically it? That's the current.
Certainly, it would be more favourable to us if it was the Otago Southland model.
Right. Nice. Well, okay. So that says to me you're not completely opposed to it, but you're opposed to the current model and you think tweaking needs to happen. Do you think that that's a possibility that tweaking may happen? Or what about just sticking with it? If you did have those 22 councils and 12 seats, what if there was more of a representative number? So let's say if it was those councils, Christchurch is obviously the biggest city in the South Island, they had the most seats, and then Dunedin would be next, and then probably I guess Invercargill would be next, and it was more proportional. Would that make any difference?
Well, as I said, there's a whole lot of questions we haven't got answers to, but certainly what I would say is, and I think this would be fair to say for many of the councils, is that it's not that we necessarily oppose the whole thing, because all of us will need some money for things. But what Three Waters will do is it'll benefit a lot of the smaller councils that perhaps some of them haven't invested a lot of money into the infrastructure. So they will get many of them might get a huge benefit, which is great. However,
like Clutha's the example.
Yeah. But councils, like ours, we have had years where we haven't put enough money into infrastructure, but we have actually started doing a lot now. Now, our infrastructure around our city is starting to look a lot better, and we've invested a lot. In our next 10-year budget, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into infrastructure. Now, that's another interesting one, because we've got another question on how will that debt be transferred, because we've put that money in from our budgets, but in a certain amount of time, we don't know when, but maybe a year or whatever, if this new entity goes ahead, how will we be compensated for that debt? So we still haven't got clear answers around that either. But all I'm saying is, if you've done really well under this system, you're penalised a little bit. And I'm not saying we're really great, but we have certainly made a huge effort to put a lot of money into it in recent time. And our systems are starting to get a lot better.
So what you're saying is we don't need to subsidise the places like Clutha that maybe haven't put their time, effort, money, rates into it. Now, this is more, we're sort of on top of our thing, and we'd be fine to be left alone and continue on ours. We don't need to subsidise those that are struggling because they haven't chosen to be maybe as organised, although it's not perfect, as Dunedin. Is that a part of the reason?
As a Dunedin ratepayer, are you happy to subsidise, other areas around the South Island that haven't put money into their infrastructure and have a higher rate because of that?
Well, I guess the question I want to follow on to you about this is, it sounds like on one level you're saying we do want other regions to subsidise us for things like public transport, because you want central government funding for public transport. For example, you said infrastructure for Mosgiel, government support needs to be that. Surely that would be the same, that there'd be other places, because taxes go to central government from all over the country, for us to get a benefit here in Dunedin for those things, but you don't want other places to therefore get benefit from us, who is on top of our Three Waters. There seems to be an inconsistency there, because people in Clutha and Otago and Canterbury, they're going to be adding to the public, to the coffers at the government, that we're going to then draw on, that you want us to draw on for public funding, but you don't want those places that need to draw on the government for their infrastructure, for their pipes funding, at our benefit. So it seems that there's an inconsistency there.
All I'm saying is that where Three Waters will perhaps have the most benefit is in smaller councils that, perhaps haven't put as much funding as others. So that's where they will see quite a big benefit. I didn't say that I don't like it myself, but the end result of that could be that we pay a higher rate because we're subsidising some of those. It could be. Another option of that could be that we have water metering, which we don't have now, and there'll be an extra cost to that as well. there could also, because there hasn't been an agreement across all the political parties, at the moment it is possible for our water systems to be privatised, because there's not the protection put in there once this entity goes ahead, unless we get agreement from all the political parties that, to safeguard that the law could be changed as it sits now so that people could privatise the system. That's another issue as well.
Now, I acknowledge you're saying there's several issues, but on the subsidising one, what I hear you saying is maybe it's not fair. My word, not saying you're using that word, because you asked me about how would I feel about my rates being used to subsidise other areas. So what I hear you saying is that it seems unfair or unworkable or not fair on the ratepayers if our money for rates on some level gets subsidised because we're in a better off position, Clutha or whatever, pick your own region. But on the flip side, you're also saying that Clutha, or pick whatever other region, is going to be subsidising us if we draw money down for this public transport that you think central government should be paying for. I'd also like to ask you about, for example, Blueskin Bay, Waitati, those areas, they need more work done on their three waters than other areas. Doesn't it also mean that Mosgiel, which you identified as, perhaps being overrepresented in the rates coffers, is technically subsidising Blueskin Bay? How's that any different from us subsidising Clutha? From a philosophical point of view, maybe. So it seems that we're all subsidising somewhere. How can we draw the line in the sand for Three Waters saying, no, we don't want to subsidise others, but Waitati's being subsidised by Mosgiel or other regions, and other regions are going to be subsidising us based on what you want, getting money from central government for public transport. South Dunedin, you talked about infrastructure as well. How that doesn't seem consistent.
I didn't say that I don't want to subsidise other areas. What I said is that it might mean that if we're in this entity, that our ratepayers are subsidising other areas, and it might mean that they've got a higher rate because of it. And I'm saying, do they want that? That's what I'm saying.
I guess what I'm asking is, are you okay with that? Because you're the one who's going to be in the position to vote.
What I would say is it depends how much my rates are going to increase by, because I'm a ratepayer as well, So, Put on top of that again as well is we've got Three Waters, but the government at the same time is also putting RMA reform on us, and it's also putting the future of local government on us as well. For our next trimester, we have a huge amount of reforms that are being pushed on local government, and I don't know whether many people are aware of it, but RMA reform is going to be massive, and what it's going to do is take away council's decision making on those areas, and it's going to centralise all of that as well. I'm not sure why the government seems to think that centralising everything is the answer. I am a bit baffled by it personally, but that is what's happening. And I think we need a mayor that is independent of an alignment with a political party when we have things from government that aren't necessarily the best thing for our city. We have, with Three Waters, our assets are estimated at about $2.5 billion. We've been offered, I think it was 46 million for those as a transfer. And now there's a new system with shares. I'm not even sure how the share system is working. Oh, we seem to have gone off. Something's happened here.
We're still here.
Okay, what's happening there? I'll put my glasses on to see that.
There's a graph on that talks about Dunedin's assets. That's all. Keep talking.
Yep. So we've been told figures around 2.5 million for our infrastructure.
Correct.
And which looks like that's what that's saying. Yep.
2.418 billion.
Yes. What's that?
That's the infrastructure assets.
Yes, exactly. And we've been offered, I think it was about 46 million. So, but the government is aware of that and has now brought out a share system. But I've heard a lot of critics discussing that model is not. It sounds very confusing. There's a lot of things with Three Waters are confusing, and they don't seem to be. They're missing, and they're not. It's not clear on how things will work. And I think that's where a lot of the fear comes too, because this whole system, look, Pat, it might be great, but I think there's so much uncertainty and so many questions unanswered and so much confusion over the whole thing and nobody's sure what's going to happen with their rates, what's going to happen in the future with the assets. All these questions, I can understand why people have concerns.
Yeah, and I guess I look at you guys who are running for this job, right, and the councillors as well, and I go, that's your job. So you can tell me. I want those answers as well, because I've done quite a lot of reading into Three Waters this week for these conversations, and, and speaking to people within council and speaking to people confidentially as well. And what I've heard from is that we're pretty much on top of our drinking water. We're pretty much on top of our sewage. There is some work to do on the stormwater, but the upgrades are in hand and either paid for or budgeted for. So I get it. Like I get the idea of we're in a pretty good state, but I also acknowledge, and you actually used this phrase earlier about Dunedin, about the vulnerable people, that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And if Clutha is a weak link, should we have a philosophy of helping them, even if it means subsidizing them? I guess I'm asking the question and wanting to know where the mayoralty candidates stand on that, because you could argue that the bottom half of the South Island is only as strong as its weakest link. And if that's Clutha at the moment because of their infrastructure, i.e. if that was going to blow up and then cause, interest or insurance rates to go up because of what's going on there, it might be good for us all to sort that out as well. I can see how the conversation could go on to include other things about weakest links as well.
That's a really good point you raised around insurance. Now, I'd like to talk about that because I think there's some issues, like, for example, Three Waters, that are out of our hands. The government's dealing with it. The other one is things that we can advocate for our people that live in our city, that make our city more livable. And one of those is insurance for issues for people, for example, in South Dunedin. In the future, that is going to be a major issue, and nobody's really talking about it. But we need to be advocating to government now. And I know sort of there's been some discussions, but around how we're going to deal with that in the future, because costs for that could become so, expensive that you're unable to live in those areas because of the cost of insurance.
Yeah, of course.
So that's something in the future we've got to look at, and it's going to be a major, in my opinion. And it's it's not a local government issue, but as a mayor, I would say that I have to look at and say, what can I advocate for that will give really good benefit for our citizens? And something like that, I think, is a big one. And we need to look at how we can help advocate in certain ways, because that's something I've done this term, is try to say, okay, what can, because people would say, how do you judge your success as a councillor? And it's a difficult one to judge. But what I've tried to do is ask questions. I haven't just sat back and said, oh, let this meeting go and say nothing and, that's it. I've been there. I've been really present, and I've asked a lot of questions around issues. And I've said, well, what about if this happens? What about if that happens? And sometimes I've asked questions that have been quite hard, that I've thought, that are tricky. But I think, ratepayers deserve an open, honest and fair system where things are transparent, and they can have representatives for the ratepayers asking those questions. And I think it's important. So that's what I've tried to do. And when there's issues that come up to advocate, I have tried to do that as well. And it's like, for example, something that came up recently in an area that I'm really passionate about, because my master's is in business entrepreneurship, and is that the gaming sector through code has an issue at the moment, and it could affect because code is the centre of digital excellence, and we've got a decent fund of money from the government to support code in Dunedin. And a lot of other cities look at Dunedin and go, oh, we'd love that money, we'd love code to be in our city, but we've got it here. So I'm stoked. And I see it as an opportunity for a lot of young people to get jobs through the digital area. And I've got a son who loves gaming, probably too much. But also it is a growing sector, and digital is growing, and it's something that I think because of COVID, we need to lick our wounds right now. A lot of us are recovering, but there's a period now over the next 3 years where we recover and we grow. And I see the remote working and the things that we can do on digital as huge opportunities for a city like Dunedin, where we're some people could say at the end of the world, but we can compete on the world scale. We do with a lot of things. Look at what Ian Taylor's done. But more people can compete internationally with the fact that, you know, there's no barriers anymore because of digital, internet, broadband, you know, all those things. And I see code being one of those areas that where we can really compete well internationally. And there's growth areas for health in that too. There's a lot of work around the health sector with code that I love the opportunities in there, and the fact that we've got a medical school in our city and it's innovative. And I yeah, anyway, that's another subject I'd like to talk about later, is around innovation. But what my point I'm getting at here with that, and why I've gone on to say that, is that code is something that we can compete and have a lot of money for, and it's an area that I think we need to support and advocate for. And when there's tax incentives that they're getting in Australia that are way better than what we've got here, I contacted our local MP, David Clark, who is the Minister for Digital, and said, what can we do? You know, I've had a response from him. So, I mean, things like that are important, and we need councillors that advocate for sectors in our city to help it grow.
We've got about 10 minutes left of the time that I've allotted for this. There's going to actually, believe it or not, there's a ton of stuff we're not going to get to in this conversation. So I'm just going to mention some of the things so people know. Like I said, I've got a couple of pages of notes, and I'm going to use all these notes pretty much for the conversations. But obviously, because we're a bit more casual and we just have more a conversational chat, some things are going to get hit, some things aren't. You know, I'm not going to ask you about the government's response to the COVID pandemic. I'm sure that'll come up in some other conversations. What I just don't want, Carmen, is somebody to go, well, why did you ask me about that, not other people? So we're not going to get to that purely because of time today. I'm not really going to talk about, I was going to ask about the potential toxic kind of culture at council, really based around this idea of, you know, the Uffindell and Sharma drama that's coming out of central government, whatever it's like at local government. But look, there's not time for that because I'm not going to go beyond the hour and a half because that's what's been agreed to. And I think it's important we stick that. So let's say you win, you're going to be mayor. What's the main thing you want to achieve in your first 12 months?
So in the first 12 months, I think it's really important that all of the councillors come together, and we look, as a mayor, I would look for where are the strengths in the councillors, what are their, you know, strong areas, where can they be best assets for our city, and allocate obviously the portfolios for them, look at what areas they can work in. And also I want to build a sort of like a mentoring system for the new councillors so that they can grow under the other more senior councillors. So, and to learn the ropes. A lot of the time when you first come in, probably for that first 4 or 5 months, you're in inductions and you're doing a lot of learning and knowing, you get to go out and you look at all the things around council. So a lot of that will be giving new knowledge to the new councillors. But I think that's really important. And for me, it'll be building a team. So building a group of councillors that can work together for the city. Because if we have got, like you mentioned, a dysfunctional, I don't think we're dysfunctional, I'll have to say that, but we have had disagreements through this last, 3 years. There's no doubt about that. We're going to still have disagreements in the next 3 years, I'm sure, because we're all, politicians are by nature a bit feisty at times, and are by nature, passionate about the things they want and do. And there's just so many different things to advocate for in our city. And when you've got conflicting people trying to advocate for different things, of course, you're going to get disagreements at times. But it's how you work through those. And so my focus for that first year will be building a really strong team, working on their strengths and mentoring the people, the new councillors that are coming in on, so they know the information around what they need to do and letting them know they're supported. Because while I don't want to, some of us haven't really felt that. So I think it's really important that we get that. And so that's something that I will focus on as a mayor. And some of the areas I think right now immediately is our businesses in the CBD are hurting because of the disruptions from the roadworks. And I want to talk to them and say, well, look, what do you need? I would like to bring together as well some city leaders that we can hear their voices too. I don't want people to just think we see and talk to them at election time. I'd like to have regular times where we touch base with our communities. We've got the community builders that is a great group of networking people who have got place-based funding through our city, and they've got a real ear to the ground for what the community and the people need. And so I'll be going to those meetings. I'll be meeting with them. I already go to some of them now. But just to give you all a plug, you do a fabulous job, guys, and community builders. And so I will definitely, I support that. I will work to build stronger relationships with mana whenua. And obviously, the big thing will be over this next term, our 3 waters, recover from COVID. We've got to look at that, and moving forward on these other reforms that the government is putting us on. But it's also building better relationships with our local MPs, because they are going to have a say on our future for some of the things that we have no control over. So we need to let them know where we feel, look, this is our view on these things. What are you thinking? So they go away knowing city leaders have said, look, we've got concerns around these things. These are our concerns. So before they make a decision, they know that if they vote a certain way, that will have an effect on our city.
2 last questions. The first one's a pretty short answer. If you can give us just 30 seconds. I'm thinking about a vanity project or your pet project. What would be, if you could only achieve one thing as mayor, what's that one little thing that you really want to do? And I've seen you talk about Sammys a lot. Would that be your kind of pet project that you really want to see sorted out? What would be the one thing that, if you could tick your magic box for the one thing I want to do is as mayor, what would it be?
Well, there's a lot of things I'd like to achieve, but yes, I am passionate about the arts, and I would like to see our arts sector a professional theatre in our city. I'd like to see a decision made on where it's going to go and what's going to happen, and if we're going to have one, and if not, what are the options there. I'd like us to make a decision, and I want us to make a decision on Sammy's and the Fortune Theatre. And I want us to say, because those buildings are sitting there, and they're empty, they're going to waste. We need spaces available for people to practice, for live music, to have an area for practice venues. If we don't practice there, we've got nothing. And I'd love to see something like the City of Literature to protect our band culture in Dunedin. We've had the Dunedin sound, but we've now got a new sound coming out, which is all the musicians who are coming forward that are they're no longer Dunedin sound, but they're coming from that, and they've grown up in Dunedin, and we want them to be mentored and nurtured, and we need places for them to be able to play. So if we don't have Sammys, we need somewhere else. The hesitation with Sammys was certainly initially is the cost. We've been told ridiculous costs to do that up. So we need something viable that's a realistic cost, and I'm happy to work with developers to sit down and say, let's give us a cost to get it to a stage where we can get bands in there playing, or let's look at a completely new building or whatever. But if we go for a completely new building, if we have to build it, that could be years away. So we need something to support our sector now, and I'd like to see decisions made on that. Yes, 100%.
Okay, Carmen, last question. Why are you the best person to be mayor for Dunedin moving forward?
Well, I think I'm the best person to be mayor because I've worked with other councillors. I've got a diverse voice. I'm a woman. I'm part Māori. I have children. As a mother, I'm a nurturer. And I've got business now. So I've got a master's in business entrepreneurship. I want to see more innovation in our city. I think outside the square. And I'd like our city to be thinking outside the square with ideas for marketing and for moving forward into the future. And I'd love to see our council take on and write an innovation strategy, and other businesses to be encouraged to do the same. Otago Polytechnic's done it under Phil Kerr's guidance, and I thought that was a great idea. And I think other places could benefit from looking at that lead. I want us to fight as a voice that's, against government decisions that are detrimental for our city, i.e. like the Polytech merger. We have one of the most innovative, amazing polytechs in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now it is being hit by this merger that, quite frankly, has been a nightmare. And I think government needs to pull back and say, okay, there's nothing wrong with saying we've made a mistake. There's nothing wrong with saying, let's look at changing this. Maybe it's not perhaps the way to do it, because right now it is not working. And it seems to me to be a shambles. We've also got merging of all the DHBs. That affects our city. We've got a medical school here. We're getting a new hospital. We need systems that work well for our city, and transport and parking. needs to be accommodated, but we have to look for the future and we need action on climate change. We've had a lot of talk, but let's see a plan written for our climate change to reach our ambitious goal of 2030.
Hey, Carmen, thanks for joining us today. You were first cab off the rank, and I appreciate you taking the time to be involved in our BHN Dunedin specials for the mayoralty. I very much appreciate you having on board. All the best for the next, what is it, 5 weeks? Is it about 5 weeks?
Lead up to the election? I think, yeah.
Something like that. Good luck with what you're achieving or trying to achieve, and I guess we will see in the first or second weekend of October, technically second weekend of October, how you go. So good luck with that, and thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Pat.